Ambassador Chen Yusuf was eating breakfast when her communicator began screaming. Not the gentle chime of a normal message. Not even the urgent pulse of a priority alert. This was the sound reserved for galactic emergencies. The sound that meant war. She abandoned her rice porridge and ran to her office. The holographic display was already active, showing the faces of 6 other ambassadors. They all looked afraid. Chen had been a diplomat for 30 years. She had never seen the Concord Council look afraid. "Ambassador Chen," said the Quarren representative, his tentacles curling with anxiety. "Thank you for joining us. We have a situation." "I can see that," Chen said. "What happened?" The display shifted to show a star map. A section of space near the galactic rim was highlighted in angry red. The Arteris Corridor. Chen knew it well. 300 billion credits worth of trade passed through that corridor every standard year. It connected the inner worlds to the frontier colonies. Whoever controlled it controlled the economic future of half the galaxy. "The Vreth Dominion has made their move," said Ambassador Kellis of the Synthetic Collective. "They have claimed the Arteris Corridor as ancestral territory. They demand the Concord recognize their ownership." Chen felt her stomach drop. The Vreth were new to galactic politics. They had achieved faster than light travel only 2 centuries ago. But they had expanded aggressively, absorbing 3 smaller species into their dominion. They were hungry and confident, and they had the largest military fleet in the Outer Rim. "That claim is absurd," Chen said. "The Vreth have no historical connection to that corridor. Their homeworld is on the opposite side of the galaxy." "They do not care about historical truth," said the Quarren representative. "They care about power, and they have made a formal challenge." The display changed again. Chen saw the ancient symbol that every species in the Concord recognized. The crossed swords over a broken world. The sign of the Watrfield. "They cannot be serious," Chen whispered. "They are completely serious," said Ambassador Kellis. "They have invoked the right of Watrfield trial. According to our own laws, we must accept or surrender the corridor without contest." Chen sat down heavily in her chair. The Watrfield. Every child in the galaxy learned about it in school. It was a pocket dimension, created millions of years ago by a species long since extinct. A place where wars could be fought without destroying real worlds. When 2 powers had a dispute that could not be resolved through diplomacy, they could take their conflict to the Watrfield. Winner takes all. It was brutal, but it had prevented countless planetary devastations. "When is the trial?" Chen asked. 14 standard day, said the Quarren representative. "We have already begun assembling our coalition forces. The Thren have offered their warrior caste. The Mindari will provide their shield technology. The collective will contribute tactical intelligence." Chen nodded slowly. This was standard procedure. The Concord would pool its military resources against the challenger. It was how they had survived for thousands of years. "What about humanity?" she asked. "Earth has significant military capability. We should contribute to the coalition." The silence that followed was strange. The other ambassadors looked at each other. Some of them looked away from the screen entirely. Chen felt a cold suspicion growing in her mind. "Ambassador Chen," said the Quarren representative carefully, "there is a complication regarding human participation." "What kind of complication?" The display changed once more. Chen found herself looking at a document so old that the translation algorithms struggled with its archaic language. It was from the original Concord Charter, the document that had founded galactic civilization as they knew it. And there, in Section 47, Paragraph 12, was a single sentence that made Chen's blood run cold. "Humanity shall not participate in Watrfield engagements under any circumstance. This prohibition is absolute and eternal, subject to no appeal or modification." Chen read the words 3 times. They did not change. "I do not understand," she said. "Why would such a prohibition exist? Humanity has been a member of the Concord for 300 years. We have never been restricted from military cooperation before." "This prohibition predates your current membership," said Ambassador Kellis. "It was enacted during humanity's first century in galactic society, more than 800 years ago." "But why? What could possibly justify such a restriction?" Again, that uncomfortable silence. The ambassadors looked at each other with expressions that Chen could not interpret. "We do not know," the Quarren representative admitted. "The records from that era are incomplete. many archives were lost in the Third Consciousness War. What little remains suggests that something happened during humanity's first Watrfield engagement, something significant enough to warrant a permanent ban. Chen felt a strange mixture of emotions, confusion, frustration, and somewhere deep inside a tiny spark of something that might have been fear. Not fear of the Freth, fear of what her own species might have done. Surely someone remembers, she said. The Quarren lived for thousands of years. The synthetic collective maintains perfect records. Someone must know what happened. The collective's records from that period were deliberately corrupted, Ambassador Kellis said. Someone erased them. We do not know who or why. And my people do not speak of it, the Quarren representative added. His tentacles had stopped moving entirely, which Chen knew was a sign of deep discomfort. Those who remember have chosen to forget. This is a wound that the galaxy preferred to leave unexamined. The Vreth ambassador appeared on the display. He was a massive creature, nearly 3 meters tall, covered in overlapping scales of iridescent blue. His teeth were visible when he spoke, and there were many of them. I see the Great Concord is discussing its strategy, the Vreth said. His translator rendered his words with an unmistakable sneer. I hope you are preparing to surrender gracefully. Your coalition of weaklings cannot stand against Vreth warriors. We have not yet finalized our coalition, the Quarren representative said carefully. The Vreth ambassador laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. I have read your ancient charter, he said. I know about the human prohibition. It seems your most aggressive species is not allowed to play. I wonder why that is. Perhaps because humans are cowards who run from real battle. Chen felt her hands curl into fists. She said nothing. Perhaps we should ask them, the Vreth continued. Ambassador Chen, tell me honestly, why were your people banned from the Watrfield? Did your ancestors flee in terror? Did they surrender without fighting? What shame do you carry? I do not know why the prohibition exists, Chen said. Her voice was calm, but it cost her effort. But I do not believe my ancestors were cowards. Then why are they forbidden? Why did your own species agree to this restriction? Yes, I researched that detail. Humanity voted in favor of their own ban. Unanimous agreement. If you were not running from shame, what were you running from? Chen had no answer. The Vreth ambassador smiled, showing all of his teeth. 14 days, ambassador. Prepare to lose everything. The display went dark. Chen sat alone in her office, staring at the ancient prohibition. 800 years ago, humanity had entered the Watrfield. Something had happened, something bad enough that the entire galaxy had agreed to never let humans return. Something bad enough that humanity itself had voted for the ban. She reached for her communicator and connected to Earth. Historical Reclamation Division, a voice answered. How may I assist you? This is Ambassador Chen Yusuf, Galactic Concord mission. I need everything you have on humanity's first Watrfield engagement, 847 years ago. Priority absolute. Ambassador, those records are sealed under the Forgotten Wars Protocol. I would need authorization from... Then get authorization. Wake up whoever you need to wake up. Unseal whatever you need to unseal. We have 14 days before the Vreth take the Arteris Corridor, and the only thing standing in our way is something our ancestors did 8 centuries ago. I need to know what happened in that dimension. There was a long pause. I will make the necessary calls, the voice said. But Ambassador, I should warn you, some of these seals were placed by the founding government itself. Whatever happened in the Watrfield, our ancestors went to extraordinary lengths to bury it. Then we need to dig it up, quickly. Chen ended the call. She sat in the darkness of her office, thinking about the Vreth and their challenge, thinking about the strange fear she had seen in the eyes of the other ambassadors, thinking about what humanity might have done that was terrible enough to erase. Her communicator chimed, a message from an address she did not recognize. When she opened it, she saw the face of an ancient Quarren. Her scales had faded to almost white with age. Her eyes were clouded but still sharp. Ambassador Chen, the old one said, my name is Matriarch Celeshi. I am told you are looking for information about humanity's first Watrfield engagement. You know something? I know everything. I was there. I am the last surviving member of the original Concord Council. Chen leaned forward. Please, tell me what happened. Tell me why humanity was banned. The matriarch was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was heavy, with 8 centuries of memory. You want to know why we banned them? Why we wrote that prohibition into our most sacred charter? Why we made it absolute and eternal? Yes, because we wanted the Watrfield to still exist. The old Quarren's eyes seemed to focus on something far away. Because in 11 hours, your species almost ended a dimension. Not a war, not a battle, an entire dimension of reality? And the most terrifying part? She paused. They did not even seem to find it difficult. Chen felt the cold spread through her entire body. I will tell you what happened, Ambassador. I will tell you everything. And then you will understand why the galaxy fears what it has forgotten, and why, perhaps, it is time for everyone to remember. The archives beneath Geneva had not been opened in 400 years. Ambassador Chen stood in the cold stone corridor, watching as technicians worked to restore power to systems that predated faster than light travel. The air smelled of dust and forgotten time. The seals were physical as well as digital, said Director Okafor of the Historical Reclamation Division. He was a thin man with nervous hands and eyes that had spent too many decades staring at old documents. Whoever buried these records wanted them to stay buried. They removed the digital copies, then sealed the physical originals behind walls of lead and concrete. We had to cut through 3 meters of material to reach this room. Why such extreme measures? Chen asked. That is what we are here to discover. The lights flickered on, revealing rows of ancient storage devices. Some were formats that Chen did not recognize. Others were simple paper documents, sealed in protective cases. The technicians began the slow process of extracting data. Matriarch Celestia had arrived that morning. The ancient Quarren moved slowly, supported by 2 assistants, but her mind remained sharp. She sat in a specially designed chair, watching the humans work with an expression that Chen could not read. I have not spoken of this in 500 years, the matriarch said. I thought I would die without ever speaking of it again. Perhaps that would have been better. We need to understand, Chen said. The Vreth are forcing our hand. If we cannot participate in the Watrfield, the Concord will lose the Arteris corridor. The economic damage could destabilize half the galaxy. And if you do participate, the damage could be far worse. Celestia's clouded eyes found Chen's face. You do not understand what your ancestors were capable of. What they might still be capable of. Then show me. Help me understand. Director Okafor approached with a portable display. His face was pale. We found the primary recording, he said. The complete footage of humanity's first Watrfield engagement, 847 years ago, against the Keith Empire. Chen felt her heart rate increase. Play it. The display came to life. The image was old, grainy by modern standards, but clear enough to understand. Chen saw the Watrfield for the first time. It was a vast dimension, seemingly infinite, with a sky that shifted through colors that had no names in any human language. The ground was solid but somehow wrong, as if it existed only because observers expected it to exist. The Watrfield was created by the precursors, Celestia explained. A species so ancient that we know nothing about them except what they left behind. The dimension is artificial. It responds to the intentions of those who enter it. The stronger the will, the greater the influence. The recording showed the Keth forces assembling. Chen recognized them from historical texts. A reptilian species, massive and armored, wielding ceremonial weapons that glowed with contained energy. There were thousands of them arranged in perfect formations. The Keth were the dominant military power of that era. Celestia continued. They had conquered 16 species. They believed themselves invincible. When humanity emerged onto the galactic stage, the Keth claimed 3 human colony worlds as tribute. Humanity refused. The Keth challenged them to Watrfield trial. Humanity had only been in space for a century, Chen said. They must have been severely outmatched. That is what everyone believed. The Keth certainly believed it. They brought 50,000 warriors, their greatest generals, their most sacred weapons. They expected the trial to last for weeks. They expected it to be glorious. The recording shifted perspective. Chen saw the other end of the dimensional space. And there, emerging from the entry portal, were the humans. There were only 800 of them. They wore uniforms that Chen did not recognize. Not the sleek, standardized suits of the modern era. These were rough, practical things, covered in straps and pouches and hard points for equipment. They carried weapons that looked crude compared to Keth energy lances. Simple projectile rifles, explosive devices, communication equipment. Is that all they sent? Chen asked. 800 against 50,000? The Concord offered to supplement their forces, Seleshi said. Humanity refused. They said they wanted to handle this themselves. On the recording, the Keth commander was speaking. His words were translated at the bottom of the display. Look at these pitiful creatures. They have come to die with honor. We shall grant them that much. Let the Watrfield witness our glory. The Keth forces began their traditional war chants. They performed their sacred pre-battle rituals. They waited for humanity to do the same. Humanity did not perform rituals. Instead, Chen watched as the human commander raised his hand. The gesture was casual, almost lazy. And then, without warning, without ceremony, without the ritual exchange of challenges that had defined Watrfield combat for 10,000 years, the humans attacked. They did not understand the rules, Seleshi said quietly, or perhaps they did not care about them. The Watrfield was meant for formal combat, limited engagements, a chance for warriors to prove themselves without destroying real worlds. But humanity treated it as a real war, and they fought it like one. The recording became chaotic. Chen saw human forces moving with terrifying coordination, spreading out across the dimensional landscape. They did not engage the Keth formations directly. Instead, they disappeared, vanished into terrain that the Keth had not even noticed existed. They mapped the dimension, Director Okafor said, his voice hushed. In the first hour, while the Keth were performing their rituals, the humans sent scouts to map the entire dimensional space. They found its weaknesses, its pressure points, its rules. On screen, the Keth began to realize something was wrong. Their communications failed. Their supply lines, which should have been protected by ancient Watrfield protocols, were suddenly exposed. Human strike teams appeared from nowhere, destroyed critical equipment, and vanished before the Keth could respond. This is not possible, the Keth commander was shouting. The Watrfield protects supply lines. It is sacred ground. But the Watrfield did not protect them, because humanity had discovered something terrible. The dimension responded to will, and human will, focused through 800 determined minds, was stronger than the Keth had imagined possible. Chen watched as the battle unfolded. No, not battle. It was not a battle. It was something closer to systematic destruction. The humans never gave the Keth a fair fight. They struck from ambush, then retreated. They poisoned water sources that should not have existed in a pocket dimension. They planted explosive devices in locations that the Keth considered spiritually protected. By the fourth hour, the Keth had lost 12,000 warriors, Seleshi said. They had not killed a single human. How is that possible? Because humanity did not play by the rules. The Watrfield had rules, unwritten but understood by every species that used it. You did not attack during rituals. You did not target supply lines. You did not use the dimension itself as a weapon. Humanity broke every rule within the first hour. And then they discovered they could break the dimension itself. The recording showed something that Chen did not understand at first. A section of the Watrfield sky seemed to tear. It was a small tear, barely visible, but it was growing. What is that? The humans found the dimensional fault lines, Seleshi said. The places where the precursor engineering was weakest. They began applying pressure, concentrated explosive force at precisely calculated points. They were trying to collapse sections of the dimension itself. Why? To trap the Keth forces in isolated pockets, to cut them off from each other permanently, to win not just the battle, but every possible future battle by destroying the arena itself. Chen stared at the screen. She watched as more tears appeared in the dimensional fabric. She watched as the Keth Empire, the greatest military power of its age, began to panic. Their warriors broke formation. Their generals screamed orders that no one could hear. Their sacred weapons proved useless against an enemy that refused to stand and fight. By the sixth hour, the Watrfield was at 60% structural integrity, Seleshi said. By the ninth hour, it was at 30%. The entire dimension was beginning to unravel, and the humans showed no sign of stopping. They would have destroyed it, Chen whispered. They would have destroyed the entire dimension just to win. Not just to win, Director Okafor said. He had found more documents, and his face was even paler now. According to these records, the human commander had a secondary objective. He was collecting data, learning how the dimension worked, so that humanity could build their own. Chen felt the room spin slightly. They were trying to replicate precursor technology, using the Watrfield as a test subject. And they were succeeding, Seleshi said. That is when the Concord intervened. We contacted humanity directly. We offered them everything they wanted. Every colony world, full territorial rights, economic privileges, anything, everything. Just stop. The recording showed the moment of ceasefire, the human commander receiving a communication. His face showed no emotion as he listened. Then he nodded once and gave an order. The human forces stopped their assault. They began stabilizing the dimensional tiers they had created. The Keth surrendered unconditionally, Seleshi said. They withdrew all claims to human space. They signed treaties that still bind them today. And then the Concord Council met in emergency session. For 3 days, we debated what to do about humanity. And you decided to ban them from the Watrfield. We decided to ask them to ban themselves. And here is the part that frightens me most, Ambassador Chen. Seleshi's ancient eyes seemed to look through time itself. They agreed immediately. Your ancestors understood exactly what they had done. They understood how close they had come to destroying something irreplaceable, and they voted unanimously to remove themselves from the Watrfield forever. Chen thought about this for a long moment. They agreed because they knew they could not trust themselves. They knew that if they were given the opportunity, they would do it again. Yes, Seleshi's voice was barely a whisper. They looked at what they were capable of, and they chose to put chains on themselves. That is why the prohibition is absolute and eternal, because humanity asked for it to be. Director Okafor approached with another document. His hands were shaking. Ambassador, there is more. The sealed archives include plans, contingency protocols for if humanity ever needed to return to the Watrfield. They have been updated regularly, every generation, right up until the present day. Chen took the document. She read it slowly. When she finished, she understood why her ancestors had chosen to forget. They never stopped preparing, she said. 800 years of pretending this never happened, and they never stopped preparing for the day they might have to do it again. Her communicator chimed, a message from the Concord Council. The Vreth had received intelligence about the human archives being opened. They were demanding to know what humanity was hiding. 14 days, Chen said quietly. In 14 days, the galaxy will remember why they feared us. The question is whether we remember why we feared ourselves. She looked at the ancient recording, frozen on the image of a dimensional tear spreading across an artificial sky. 800 humans against 50,000 Keth. 11 hours to near victory, and the willingness to destroy an entire dimension to achieve it. Now she understood the prohibition. Now she understood why it was absolute. And now she had to decide whether to break it. There's a reason humanity were banned from the Watrfield. Now they remember why. The Concord Council chamber was designed to make everyone feel small. A vast dome of crystalline material, it could hold representatives from 1,000 species. Today it held only a handful, but the tension made the space feel crowded. Ambassador Chen stood at the central podium, the ancient recording displayed behind her. The other Concord ambassadors sat in uncomfortable silence. The Vreth delegation occupied the upper gallery, watching with predatory interest. Now you understand, Chen said. The prohibition was not punishment. It was protection. Humanity recognized what we were capable of, and we chose to remove ourselves from the Watrfield permanently. The Vreth warlord, a massive creature named Thesek, leaned forward in his seat. His scales caught the light, shifting from blue to violet as he moved. A charming story, Thesek said. Ancient footage of a battle that supposedly occurred 800 years ago. Grainy images that could easily be fabricated. Do you expect us to believe that 800 soft, fragile humans defeated 50,000 Keth warriors? The Keth believe it, Chen replied. Their surrender treaty remains in effect. They have never challenged humanity since that day. The Keth are cowards. They surrendered because they lacked the will to fight. Perhaps humanity simply outlasted them in a long siege. Thessak's teeth showed him what might have been a smile. This footage proves nothing. If humanity was truly so dangerous, why has no one seen this power in 8 centuries? Because we chose not to use it, or because it never existed. Thessak rose from his seat, his massive form dominating the gallery. I think this is a trick, a desperate attempt to frighten us away from our rightful claim. The Arteris corridor belongs to the Vreth Dominion. We will take it in the Watrfield, and your pathetic coalition of weaklings will not stop us. Chen felt her patience wearing thin. She had spent 3 days trying diplomacy. She had shown the Vreth the evidence. She had explained the history, and they refused to believe. Warlord Thessak, she said carefully, I am asking you, on behalf of humanity and the Concord, to withdraw your challenge. The consequences of proceeding could be catastrophic. Threats from humans? Thessak laughed, and several of his officers joined him. Your species is banned from the Watrfield. You cannot even participate. You will watch from the sidelines as we crush your allies and claim what is ours. The prohibition can be lifted. The laughter stopped. Every eye in the chamber turned to Chen. What did you say? Thessak asked. The prohibition is absolute and eternal, subject to no appeal or modification. Chen quoted the ancient text from memory. But it was enacted by the original Concord Council with humanity's consent. A new council, with humanity's consent, could lift it. The chamber erupted in noise. Ambassadors were shouting at each other. The Vreth officers were demanding translation of what had just happened. Only Thessak remained calm, his predator eyes fixed on Chen. You would not dare, he said quietly. The prohibition exists because even your own species feared what you might do. Are you telling me you are willing to become that again? Chen met his gaze without flinching. I am telling you that if you insist on this challenge, you will face the consequences. We have spent 800 years pretending to forget, but we never really forgot. We never stopped preparing. And if you force us back into the Watrfield, you will discover why the galaxy was right to be afraid. For a long moment, Thessak stared at her. Chen could see calculation in his eyes. He was weighing her words, trying to determine if she was bluffing. Then he smiled again. Empty threats, he said. You are trying to frighten me with stories. But I have built the greatest military force in the Outer Rim. I have conquered 3 species. I do not fear ancient legends. He turned to address the full council. The Vreth challenge stands. We will meet your coalition in the Watrfield in 11 days. And when we are victorious, you will remember this moment. You will remember that you tried to scare us with children's tales, and we were not afraid. The Vreth delegation departed. Chen stood alone at the podium, surrounded by the worried murmurs of the other ambassadors. Matriarch Celestia approached slowly, her ancient body supported by her assistants. He does not believe, she said. I have seen that look before. The Keth had the same expression before they entered the Watrfield. Absolute confidence that they could not lose. The Keth learned otherwise. The Keth nearly died for their lesson. The Sak may not be so fortunate. Celestia's tentacles curled in what Chen had learned to recognize as deep concern. You spoke of lifting the prohibition. Was that sincere? Chen was silent for a moment. I have been in contact with Earth. The military council has been reviewing the contingency protocols. They believe they can be ready in time. And you trust them? You trust that humanity can return to the Watrfield and not become what they were before? I do not know, Chen admitted, but I know that if we do nothing, the Vreth will take the Arteris corridor. The economic damage will destabilize half the galaxy. Species that depend on that trade route will face starvation and collapse. Millions could die from the indirect effects alone. And if you do something, the Watrfield itself might cease to exist. It is the only neutral ground the galaxy has. Without it, every territorial dispute becomes a real war. Billions could die from the direct effects. Chen nodded slowly. I understand the stakes. That is why I am still hoping the Vreth will reconsider. But she knew they would not. She had seen Thessak's eyes. He was not a leader who backed down from challenges. He was a conqueror, and conquerors only understood one language. That evening, Chen returned to her quarters and connected to Earth. General Okonkwo appeared on the display. She was a small woman with gray hair and calm eyes that had seen 3 decades of military service. Ambassador, Okonkwo said, I received your message. The Council has reviewed the contingency protocols. And we can be ready. 3 days to fully prepare. The equipment has been maintained continuously since the original engagement. The training programs have been updated with each generation. We have soldiers who have spent their entire careers preparing for a Watrfield deployment that everyone assumed would never happen. Chen felt a chill despite the climate-controlled room. You sound almost eager. Not eager, Okonkwo said. Resigned. We always knew this day might come. Our ancestors made us promise to be ready. They did not want their descendants to forget what we were capable of. So we remembered. We trained. We prepared. And now we may have to use what we learned. The Vreth have 50,000 warriors. I can negotiate for coalition support, but most species are reluctant to commit forces alongside humans. They are afraid of what might happen. We will not need coalition support. Okonkwo's voice was matter-of-fact. The contingency protocols call for a force of 800, the same number as the original engagement. 800 against 50,000. Again. The numbers are symbolic. Our ancestors proved what 800 humans could do when they stopped following the rules. We intend to prove it again. Okonkwo paused. Ambassador, I want you to understand something. What we are about to do is not something we take lightly. Every soldier in this force has been briefed on the history. They know what our ancestors did. They know how close they came to destroying the Watrfield entirely. And they are willing to do it again? They are willing to do whatever is necessary to win. That is what makes us dangerous. Okonkwo's eyes seemed to look through the display, across the light years, directly into Chen's soul. Our ancestors were not monsters. They were people who had been pushed into a corner and refused to lose. They looked at the rules of the Watrfield and decided those rules were obstacles to victory. They looked at the dimension itself and decided it was a weapon to be used. They would have destroyed everything to win. And you? I am my ancestor's daughter. If the Vreth force us into that dimension, we will do what needs to be done. We will break every rule. We will use every weapon. And if necessary, we will tear the Watrfield apart to achieve victory. Okonkwo's voice softened slightly. But Ambassador, I need you to understand something else. We do not want this. We have spent 8 centuries hoping we would never have to become this again. The prohibition was our idea because we knew what we were capable of. We chose chains because we did not trust ourselves without them. Chen thought about the Vreth warlord, his arrogance, his certainty that humanity was bluffing. The Vreth will not withdraw, she said. I have tried every diplomatic option. They believe the ancient footage is fabricated. They believe humanity is weak. Then they will learn otherwise. Okonkwo's expression did not change. In 11 days, the Vreth will enter the Watrfield expecting a traditional battle against a coalition of species playing by the rules. They will find 800 humans who have been training for this moment for 8 centuries, and they will discover why the galaxy was right to be afraid of us. Chen ended the call and sat alone in her quarters. Through the window, she could see the stars. Somewhere out there, the Vreth were preparing their forces. They were sharpening their weapons and practicing their war chants and dreaming of glory. They did not understand what was coming. Chen pulled up the ancient footage again. She watched the human commander give his first order, the casual gesture that had launched humanity's most terrifying military engagement. 800 soldiers who had treated an artificial dimension as a real battlefield and had nearly broken reality to win. Her ancestors had looked at the Watrfield and seen a puzzle to be solved, a system to be exploited, a dimension to be weaponized. And now, 800 years later, their descendants were preparing to do the same thing. Chen closed the footage and began drafting her final diplomatic appeal to the Vreth. She knew it would fail. She knew that in 11 days, the prohibition would be lifted and humanity would return to the Watrfield. She just hoped the galaxy would survive the reminder of why they had been banned in the first place. Outside her window, the stars continued to shine, indifferent to the war that was coming, indifferent to the dimension that might soon cease to exist, indifferent to the ancient fear that was about to wake up and remember why it had been sleeping. 11 days. The countdown had begun. There's a reason humanity were banned from the Watrfield. Now they remember why. The military installation on Mars had no official name. It appeared on no maps. For 800 years it had existed in quiet secrecy, maintained by soldiers who trained for a war they hoped would never come. Now it was active. General Okonkwo walked through corridors that thrummed with energy. Soldiers in unmarked uniforms moved with practiced efficiency, checking equipment that had been maintained across generations. The weapons were old designs, proven effective in the original engagement, refined and improved over centuries of careful development. General, Colonel Hayes fell into step beside her. He was young for his rank, barely 40, but his eyes had the focused intensity of someone who understood exactly what he had trained for. All units report ready, equipment check complete, dimensional stabilization protocols confirmed. Casualties projections? Our models suggest we can achieve full victory with less than 10% losses. But those models assume the Vreth fight traditionally? They will. Okonkwo had studied the Vreth military for months. They are a ceremonial culture. Their warfare is built around honor and display. They will expect us to fight the same way. Like the Keth did. Exactly like the Keth did. They entered the main briefing room. 800 soldiers stood at attention. They were humanity's most elite warriors, drawn from every nation and every branch of military service. They had been selected not just for skill, but for understanding. Each of them knew the history. Each of them had studied the original engagement. Each of them understood what they were being asked to do. At ease, Okonkwo said. The soldiers relaxed, but only slightly. In 3 days, the Concord Council will vote to lift the prohibition against human participation in the Watrfield. The vote will pass. Every species in the Concord understands what happens if the Vreth take the Arteris corridor. They would rather face the possibility of us than the certainty of Vreth dominance. She activated the holographic display. The Watrfield appeared, that strange dimension with its shifting sky and its reality that bent to will. 800 years ago, your ancestors entered this dimension. They faced 50,000 Keth warriors who believed themselves invincible. In 11 hours, they brought the Keth Empire to its knees and nearly collapsed the dimension itself. Okonkwo paused. The Vreth believe this is a legend. They believe the footage was fabricated. They believe humanity is weak. A ripple of something passed through the assembled soldiers. Not quite amusement, something darker. You are going to show them otherwise. The briefing continued. Tactics were reviewed. Equipment was assigned. Every soldier received their specific mission parameters. They would enter the Watrfield as their ancestors had, a small force against overwhelming numbers, and they would fight the same way. No rules, no ceremony, no mercy. After the briefing, Okonkwo retreated to her private office. She sat alone in the darkness, looking at a photograph on her desk. Her grandmother, a young woman in an ancient uniform, one of the 800 who had entered the Watrfield against the Keth. You wanted us to remember, Okonkwo said quietly to the photograph. You made sure we would never forget. Every generation, you passed down the knowledge, the tactics, the willingness to do whatever was necessary. The photograph did not respond. It never did. But Okonkwo felt the weight of her grandmother's legacy pressing down on her shoulders. A knock at the door. Ambassador Chen entered, her diplomatic credentials replaced by simple civilian clothes. General, I wanted to see the preparations for myself. And what do you see? Chen looked around the office. The ancient photograph, the tactical displays, the quiet efficiency of soldiers preparing for war. I see people who have been waiting for this moment for 8 centuries. I am not sure if that is reassuring or terrifying. It is both. Okonkwo gestured for Chen to sit. Ambassador, I want you to understand something before we begin. What we are about to do, it comes from a specific place in human psychology, a willingness to break any rule, cross any line, use any weapon to achieve victory. Our ancestors called it total war. It is not something we are proud of. But it is effective, devastatingly so. The Keth were a warrior culture with 10,000 years of military tradition. They believed in honor and fair combat and sacred rules of engagement. They never stood a chance against people who believed in none of those things. Okonkwo leaned forward. The Vreth are the same. They have built their entire society around the concept of glorious warfare. They have rituals and traditions and codes of conduct. They expect their enemies to have the same. And we do not. We have one rule: win. Everything else is negotiable. Chen was silent for a long moment. The matriarch Celeshi told me something before I left the Concord. She said the most terrifying thing about humans was not our capacity for violence. It was our capacity for innovation. We looked at the Watrfield and saw opportunities that no other species had ever considered. We are problem solvers. Put us in a box, and we will find a way out. Put us in a dimension designed for ceremonial combat, and we will find ways to weaponize the dimension itself. Okonkwo's expression was calm, but there was something beneath it, something old and patient and dangerous. The Vreth think they are walking into a traditional Watrfield trial. They are walking into a trap that has been 800 years in the making. The next 3 days passed quickly. The Concord Council voted as expected. The prohibition was lifted, with humanity's consent, for the duration of the trial. The other species watched with nervous anticipation. The Vreth responded with mockery. Warlord Thesic released a public statement declaring that humanity's participation proved their desperation. He boasted that the Vreth would crush the humans first, then deal with the rest of the coalition at their leisure. He had no idea what was coming. On the final night before the engagement, Okonkwo assembled her forces one last time. They gathered in the main hangar, 800 soldiers in their ancient uniforms, carrying weapons that had been refined across centuries. "Tomorrow we enter the Watrfield," Okonkwo said, her voice carried across the silent hangar. "The Vreth have brought 50,000 warriors. They have their greatest generals, their most sacred weapons, their absolute certainty of victory." She paused, letting the words sink in. 800 years ago, your ancestors faced the same odds, the same arrogance, the same certainty, and they won. Not because they were stronger, not because they were braver. They won because they refused to play by the rules. They won because they treated the Watrfield as a real war instead of a game. They won because they were willing to do things that no other species had ever considered. The soldiers stood perfectly still. They knew what was coming. "Tomorrow you will do the same. You will enter the Watrfield and you will break every rule it has. You will strike without warning. You will target their command structure. You will poison their supplies and collapse their communications. You will use the dimension itself as a weapon." Okonkwo's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "And if necessary, you will tear the Watrfield apart to achieve victory, just as your ancestors almost did. Just as we have been preparing to do for 8 centuries. She looked across the assembled soldiers. Men and women who had dedicated their lives to this moment, who had trained in secret for a war that everyone hoped would never come, who were about to show the galaxy why humanity had been banned from the Watrfield in the first place. The Vreth think we are weak. They think the ancient footage was fabricated. They think they are walking into an easy victory." Okonkwo smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Let them keep thinking that. Right up until the moment they realized their mistake." The hangar erupted in a single coordinated shout. 800 voices raised in acknowledgement. 800 soldiers ready to fight. 800 humans about to remind the galaxy why they had been afraid. Ambassador Chen watched from the observation deck. Matriarch Celeshi stood beside her, the ancient Quarren's tentacles curled in complex patterns that suggested deep emotion. "So it begins again," Celeshi said quietly. 800 years since the last time, and humanity has not changed at all." "We have changed," Chen replied. "We chose to stop. We chose to ban ourselves. We chose chains because we did not trust our own nature. And now you are breaking those chains." The Vreth gave us no choice. Below, the soldiers began boarding their transport. They moved with silent efficiency, no wasted motion, no ceremony. Just 800 people preparing to do terrible things in service of victory. "I watched your ancestors enter the Watrfield," Celeshi said. "I watched them break every rule. I watched them nearly destroy an entire dimension. And the worst part," her clouded eyes found Chen's face. "They did not even seem to find it difficult. It was natural to them, as easy as breathing." Chen had no answer to that. She watched the last soldiers board the transport. She watched the hangar doors close. She watched humanity prepare to remind the galaxy why they had been banned. Tomorrow, she said quietly. Tomorrow the Vreth will remember why the prohibition exists, and the galaxy will remember why they were right to be afraid of us. The transport's engines activated. The sound filled the hangar, a low rumble that seemed to shake the very foundations of the installation. Tomorrow the Watrfield gates would open. Tomorrow humanity would return, and tomorrow the Vreth would learn the lesson that the Keth had learned 800 years ago. Some rules exist for very good reasons, and some species should never be underestimated. There's a reason humanity were banned from the Watrfield. Now they remember why. The Watrfield gates opened at exactly noon, Galactic Standard Time. The Concorde had arranged for the entire event to be broadcast across every inhabited world. Billions of beings watched as the ancient dimensional portals activated for the first time in centuries. The Vreth entered first. 50,000 warriors in gleaming armor, carrying weapons that glowed with barely contained energy. Warlord Thesak led them personally, his massive form unmistakable at the head of the procession. They arranged themselves in perfect formations, their war chants echoing across the dimensional space. The Watrfield itself seemed to welcome them. The shifting sky stabilized into proud colors of crimson and gold. The ground beneath their feet became solid and firm. The dimension recognized their ceremonial intent and responded appropriately. Thesak surveyed his forces with satisfaction. Behind him, 50,000 of the finest warriors in the outer rim stood ready for glory. Before him, the dimensional space stretched to infinity, waiting for the battle to begin. "Where are the humans?" asked his second-in-command. Thesak gestured toward the distant portal. "They will come. Let them take their time. Let them see what they face. Fear will defeat them before the battle even begins." The Vreth waited. Their war chants continued. Their sacred rituals proceeded according to ancient tradition. This was how warfare was meant to be conducted. With honor, with ceremony, with respect for the enemy. The human portal activated. 800 soldiers stepped through, moving in perfect silence. They wore no ceremonial armor. They carried no glowing weapons. Their uniforms were dull and practical, covered in equipment that the Vreth could not identify. Thesak stared across the dimensional space. He had expected more. He had expected at least a show of strength. Instead, he saw a pathetically small force that seemed almost embarrassed to be there. "Is this a joke?" he asked. "They send 800 against 50,000? Do they wish to surrender with honor?" His second-in-command was studying the humans through a magnification device. "Warlord, they are not forming battle lines. They are spreading out. They appear to be mapping the terrain. Let them map. Let them explore. When they are finished, we will crush them." The Vreth continued their preparations. The sacred pre-battle rituals required another hour to complete. The war chants had to be sung in their entirety. The commanders had to formally challenge each other according to ancient tradition. They never got the chance. The first explosion caught Thesak completely off guard. It came from behind his forces in a section of the dimension that should have been empty. Supply caches that had been established according to Watrfield protocols, protected by ancient agreements that every species respected, simply ceased to exist. "What is happening?" Thesak roared. "Warlord, we are under attack. The humans, they are moving through the terrain. They are appearing and disappearing. Our scouts cannot track them." More explosions. Communication relays went dark. Medical stations were destroyed before the wounded could even be created. The Vreth forces, which had been arranged in perfect ceremonial formations, suddenly found themselves isolated from each other. "This is not possible," Thesak snarled. "The Watrfield has rules. Supply lines are protected. Communication networks are sacred. They cannot do this. But the humans could do this. And they were." General Okonkwo watched the chaos unfold from her mobile command position. Her forces moved like ghosts through the dimensional landscape, striking targets that the Vreth believed were untouchable. Every sacred rule of Watrfield engagement was being broken simultaneously. "Phase 1 complete," Colonel Hayes reported. "Supply lines severed. Communication network collapsed. Medical infrastructure eliminated. The Vreth forces are operating blind. Begin Phase 2. Phase 2 was worse. The Watrfield responded to intention. Every species knew this. Strong wills could shape the dimensional landscape, create advantages, influence the flow of battle. But no species had ever attempted what humanity was about to do. Human soldiers, specially trained for this purpose, began focusing their collective will on the dimensional fabric itself, not to shape it, to break it. The first tears appeared in the Watrfield sky within the hour, small at first, barely visible, but growing. Thesek watched in horror as reality itself began to unravel above his head. The shifting sky, which had been so welcoming when they arrived, was now fragmenting. Pieces of it seemed to fall away into darkness. "What are they doing?" he demanded. "What is happening to the dimension?" His advisors had no answers. Nothing in their military training had prepared them for this. The Watrfield was supposed to be stable. It had existed for millions of years. It could not simply break, but it was breaking. By the third hour, the Vreth forces were in complete disarray. Units that had been separated by human attacks found themselves in different temporal phases, unable to communicate or coordinate. The dimensional geography kept shifting, paths that had existed moments ago simply vanishing into the spreading tears. Thesek gathered his personal guard and attempted to launch a direct assault on the human positions. They marched toward where they believed the human forces were concentrated. They found nothing. "They are not here," his guard captain reported. "There are signs of activity, but no actual humans. They have to be somewhere." But the humans were everywhere and nowhere. They appeared from dimensional tiers, struck with devastating precision, and vanished before the Vreth could respond. They used the breaking dimension as a weapon, forcing Vreth units into unstable regions where reality itself became hostile. By the sixth hour, Thesek understood that he had made a terrible mistake. The ancient footage had not been fabricated. Humanity had not been bluffing. Everything the galaxy had feared for 8 centuries was real, and it was happening again. He found General Okonkwo at the 7th hour, not through skill or tactics, but because she allowed herself to be found. She stood alone on a stable platform, surrounded by dimensional tiers that seemed to swirl around her like a protective barrier. "Warlord Thesok," she said. Her voice was calm, almost bored. "You seem to be having difficulty." "Stop this," Thesok demanded. "Whatever you are doing to the dimension, stop it. The Watrfield is currently at 18% structural integrity. If it drops below 10%, the dimension will collapse entirely. Everyone inside, your forces and mine, will cease to exist." Okonkwo's expression did not change. "I am prepared to accept those losses. Are you?" Thesek stared at her, this small, fragile human female who stood before him without armor, without weapons, without any apparent concern for her own safety. "You would destroy yourself, destroy the Watrfield itself, just to defeat us?" "We would do whatever is necessary to win. That is what makes us dangerous." Okonkwo glanced at the readings on her tactical display. 16% now. The rate of decay is accelerating. You have perhaps 20 minutes to make a decision. This is madness. No, Warlord, this is humanity. Around them, the Watrfield continued to fall apart. The sky was more darkness than color now. The ground beneath their feet trembled with dimensional instability. The sounds of distant explosions and collapsing reality filled the air. Thesek looked at his forces. Thousands had already been lost to the chaos. Thousands more were trapped in isolated pockets, unable to reach him. The glorious victory he had imagined was now a desperate scramble for survival, and all of it had been accomplished by 800 humans who refused to follow the rules. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "Full withdrawal of all Vreth claims to the Arteris Corridor, a formal treaty recognizing Concord sovereignty, reparations for the disruption you have caused." Okonkwo's voice remained calm. "And a personal acknowledgement from you, broadcast to every inhabited world, that humanity was not bluffing." "You want me to humiliate myself? I want you to tell the truth. The galaxy forgot why they feared us. It is time they remembered." Thesek stood in silence for a long moment. The dimensional tiers continued to spread. The stability readings continued to fall. Everything he had built, everything he had conquered, was about to be lost in a collapsing dimension, because he had underestimated humanity. "I yield," he said. The words tasted like poison. "The Vreth Dominion surrenders unconditionally." Okonkwo nodded once. She raised her hand, a casual gesture that reminded Thesic uncomfortably of the ancient footage, and spoke into her communicator. All units, begin stabilization protocols. The Vreth have surrendered. The human forces stopped their assault, but they did not stop working. Across the dimension, soldiers who had been tearing reality apart now began putting it back together. They had come prepared for this too. They had planned for victory, but also for what came after. Within hours, the Watrfield's structural integrity had stabilized at 40%. It would take years to fully repair the damage, but the dimension would survive. Ambassador Chen stood in the Conquered Council chamber, watching the broadcast of Thesic's formal surrender. The massive warlord knelt before a human general, less than half his size, speaking words that the entire galaxy could hear. I underestimated humanity. I believed the ancient stories were myths. I was wrong. The prohibition against human participation in the Watrfield was not a weakness. It was a mercy that humanity offered to the galaxy, and that we were foolish enough to reject. Matriarch Celestia watched beside Chen. Her ancient eyes were unreadable. And now, the matriarch asked, what happens now that the galaxy remembers? The prohibition will be reinstated, Chen said. Humanity will vote for it, again. Because we still understand what we are capable of, we still choose to put chains on ourselves. Even after proving you could win without them? Especially after proving that. Chen watched as Thesic finished his surrender, as the Vreth forces were escorted from the Watrfield, as the dimensional portals began to close. 800 years ago, our ancestors looked at what they had done and decided it was too dangerous to ever do again. Today, their descendants proved them right. The council chamber filled with delegates. Species from across the galaxy had come to witness this moment. Many of them looked at the human delegation with new eyes, new fear, new respect. General Okonkwo arrived last, still wearing her dull uniform, still carrying herself with that quiet confidence that seemed so much more dangerous than any ceremonial display. The prohibition should remain absolute and eternal, she told the council. Humanity asks that this requirement be maintained. We do not trust ourselves without it. The vote was unanimous, just as it had been 800 years ago. Chen walked with Okonkwo through the corridors of the conquered station. Outside the windows, the stars burned in eternal silence. Was it worth it? Chen asked. Becoming what we were again, even for a day? We never stopped being what we were, Okonkwo replied. We just chose not to show it. Today was a reminder, to them and to ourselves. A reminder of what? Okonkwo stopped at a window. She looked out at the galaxy, at the billions of worlds and trillions of beings who now remembered why they had feared humanity. That the most dangerous thing about us is not our capacity for destruction, it is our willingness to use it. She paused. And perhaps more importantly, our ability to choose when not to. Far away in the slowly healing Watrfield, dimensional engineers from a dozen species worked to repair the damage. They would talk for centuries about what they had witnessed. They would study the techniques humanity had developed. They would wonder if any other species could do the same. And they would remember why the prohibition existed. Not because humanity was weak, not because they were cowards, but because when humanity decided to fight, they did not stop until they had won. And the definition of victory, for humans, was far more flexible than anyone else had ever imagined. The Watrfield would survive. The galaxy would move on. The Arteris corridor would remain under conquered control. And humanity would return to their quiet existence, maintaining their ancient weapons, training their elite forces, waiting patiently for the day they might have to fight again. Hoping that day would never come, knowing that if it did, they would be ready. Some lessons are learned once and never forgotten. This was one of them.